Everyone laughed at the poor farmer, said he had nothing left but debts and an old horse. But they stopped laughing the day that horse struck her hoof against the frozen ground, and the earth answered back. The dawn came colourless. No pink, no gold, only a grey hush that wrapped the valley like a shroud. Frost clung to the weeds. The wind didn't move. It was the kind of silence that didn't promise peace, only surrender. Tom Hayden stood on his porch, a silhouette against the cold light. The house behind him sagged like a tired man. The roof whistled when the wind changed direction. He had stopped fixing it years ago. There was no point fixing what was already dying. He looked out over the fields. Once golden with wheat. Now just brittle stalks, ghosts of crops that refused to grow. Every year he'd tried to bring the land back. Fertilizer, new seed, prayers whispered under his breath. Every year it gave him less. It was as if the soil itself had grown tired of him. Inside, the table was covered in letters. Bold words in red ink. Final notice. Foreclosure. Payment due. He burned them one by one in the stove, watching the paper curl into black flakes. The fire was the only thing still alive in that house. His hands were cracked and scarred, the hands of a man who had fought too long. Once they had built fences, dug wells, lifted his wife into his arms. Now they trembled when he tried to hold a cup of coffee. He didn't notice anymore. The photograph on the mantel hadn't moved in years. A woman smiling, eyes bright, sunlight on her hair. His wife, Sarah, gone too soon. A fever had taken her one autumn, when the corn still stood tall and the air smelled of smoke. After that, laughter left the farm. He lived now in the echo of what used to be. Days blurred into one another. Wake up before sunrise. Feed the horse. Check the fences. Eat what was left. Sleep, or try to. Sometimes, late at night, he talked to her picture. Asked if she could still see him. The photograph never answered. The only creature that still listened was Raven. An old mare, black as a rainstorm, with eyes that saw too much. She had carried ploughs, wagons, harvests, and dreams. Now her manner was tangled, her step slow, but her presence steady. Tom often leaned against her side, talking softly while she chewed her hay. She never spoke, but her warmth said everything words couldn't. Sometimes he thought the farm would already be buried if not for her. She was the last heartbeat left in the place. That morning, the air was colder than usual. Tom stepped outside, breath fogging in front of him. Raven stood near the far fence, still as a shadow. Her ears flicked, her head lifted. Something in her posture made him pause. Then she struck the ground. Once. Twice. The sharp thud of her hoof broke the silence like a gunshot. "Easy, girl," he muttered, walking closer. But she did it again, harder this time. Her hoof split the frost, sending a puff of white dust into the air. Her eyes, dark and deep, fixed on the earth beneath her. Tom frowned. He looked down. Nothing but dirt and weeds. Still, there was something about the sound. Hollow. Strange. Raven struck the ground one more time. A dull echo rose from below, faint but undeniable, not solid earth, but something hidden. Tom froze, his breath catching. The cold wind brushed against his face. The horse snorted, pouring again as if demanding he listen. He knelt, pressed his hand to the ground. The soil gave under his palm, soft, disturbed, unnatural. His pulse quickened. He didn't know why, but something inside him whispered that his life was about to change. For years, the land had taken everything from him. Now, for the first time, it felt like it wanted to give something back. Raven's breath steamed in the air. Tom stared at the frozen earth between them. And for the first time in a long time, he felt the faint tremor of a secret waiting to be found. The morning stayed quiet, too quiet. Even the birds seemed to keep their distance. Raven stood motionless, her dark coat glistening with frost, her breath rising like smoke. Tom stared at the patch of disturbed earth where her hoof had struck. He told himself it was nothing. A burrow, maybe. An old root. But that sound, that hollow echo, kept repeating in his mind. He fetched the shovel leaning against the fence. The metal bit into the ground with a dull crunch. Cold soil cracked apart, clods falling heavy against his boots. Raven didn't move. She watched him dig, her gaze steady, almost human. "Crazy old man," Tom muttered under his breath. "Digging holes 'cause a horse told him to." But he kept digging anyway. Something in him, pride, fear, curiosity, refused to stop. The deeper he went, the stranger it felt. The soil grew softer, looser, as if recently turned. Then, clang. The shovel hit something hard. Tom froze. The vibration ran up his arm, sharp and cold. He crouched, brushing away the dirt with his hands. Under the dark soil, a dull red glimmer appeared, rusted metal. He scraped more, heart pounding faster now. The outline emerged, a box, large and rectangular, bound with corroded iron bands. Roots twisted around it like fingers, clutching it to the earth. Tom sat back on his heels, breathing hard. What the hell? The thing was old. Very old. He could smell it, the mix of rust, wood rot, and damp clay. It took nearly an hour to free it. His back screamed, his palms blistered, but he didn't stop. When the box finally loosened, it came out of the ground with a wet groan, like the earth itself didn't want to let go. He dragged it onto the frost, collapsing beside it. For a long moment, he just stared. The chest looked like it belonged to another century. Blackened wood, rusted bolts, and faint markings eaten by time. It was heavier than it should have been. Raven approached, her hooves sinking into the soft soil. She lowered her head, sniffing the box, then looked at him with those same knowing eyes. As if she'd been waiting for this moment all along. Tom hesitated. He didn't believe in omens, didn't believe in miracles. But something in the air felt different now, charged, alive. He pried at the lid with the edge of his shovel. The metal screeched. The hinges gave way with a sudden snap. A smell rose from inside, damp, stale, thick with time. Inside were stacks of old papers, tied in faded twine. Bundles of letters, maps, documents. Each yellowed with age, edges curling, ink faded but still there. Tom reached in with trembling hands. The first page he lifted was written in cursive, the kind people used a century ago. He could barely make out the words, agreements, compensation, land. The handwriting trembled, rushed, scared. He set it down and opened another bundle. This one was stamped with a seal, a name he knew all too well. Hayden. His great-grandfather's signature. The man who had built this farm. A chill ran down his spine. The pages weren't about crops or harvests. They were contracts. Sales. Transfers of property from other farmers, all dated the same year the railroad passed through this valley. Tom's breath caught. The letters told of men pressured to sell, of promises broken, of land taken by force. And at the center of it all, his family name. He pushed the chest away, disgust rising in his throat. No, that can't be right. But the papers didn't lie. The ink might have faded, but the truth hadn't. His family hadn't been victims of bad luck. They'd been part of something darker. The land that had starved him for years, it wasn't cursed. It was guilty. The wind picked up, carrying dust across the field. The house creaked in the distance, the sound hollow and uneasy. Raven shifted beside him, snorting, her breath white against the cold air. Tom sat there in the dirt, staring at the chest, unable to move. The morning sun rose behind the ridge, spilling light over the valley. It caught on the iron bands of the box, making them gleam like old blood. He whispered, barely audible, "What did you make me find, girl?" Raven's ears flicked, and for a moment, he thought he saw something, not reflection, not instinct, but recognition in her eyes. The earth beneath him was no longer just soil. It was a grave, and he had just unearthed the first bone. Night fell heavy over the valley. No stars, no moon, only wind whispering through the broken shingles of the roof. Inside the farmhouse, a single lamp flickered, throwing long, trembling shadows across the walls. Tom sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by ghosts made of paper. Letters, maps, contracts, all spread before him like the remains of an autopsy. He read until his eyes blurred. The ink had faded, but the words still screamed. They spoke of men forced to sell their land, of families leaving under threat, of chemical compounds tested in secret, of soil resilience trials and agricultural optimization. Phrases that meant nothing to farmers, but everything to the men in suits who had come to take. The handwriting changed from page to page, but one name appeared again and again. Henry Hayden. Tom's great-grandfather. The man who had built everything he was now losing. He had always imagined Henry as a hero, the one who endured droughts and wars and still kept the farm alive. But the truth that stared up at him now painted a darker picture. His land wasn't an inheritance. It was a theft wrapped in a legacy. The lamplight flickered again. For a moment, he thought he saw movement by the window, a figure, maybe, or just the wind. He tried to shake the thought, but the feeling stayed. He wasn't alone. Raven shifted outside. Her hooves thudded softly against the ground. Tom rose, the floor creaking under his boots, and stepped out into the freezing air. The field stretched silent beneath the starlit dark. Frost shimmered faintly, and in the distance, the oak tree loomed like a shadow from another world. Raven stood near the edge of the field, her head low, her ears twitching. "What is it, girl?" he whispered. She pawed the ground again, not where they'd dug before, but farther out. The same motion. The same insistence. Tom's stomach tightened. He walked toward her, shovel in hand. The moon broke through the clouds, painting the soil in silver. He knelt where she stood and pressed his hand against the ground. Soft. Looser than the rest. He began to dig. Each strike of the shovel echoed in the still air. The earth gave way, releasing the damp scent of decay and old roots. And then, another sound, the dull clunk of metal. Tom's heart skipped. He dug faster. Fragments appeared, splintered wood, rusted nails, corroded metal bars. He brushed them clean with trembling hands. Railroad ties. Bent, broken, buried deep. Exactly as the letters had described. He stood there, staring down at the proof, the cold air burning in his lungs. The stories weren't rumors. The company really had been here. They'd carved the land open, stolen its life, and buried the evidence, right under his feet. Raven snorted sharply, her breath rising in a cloud. Tom looked up at her, his voice barely more than a whisper. "You knew, didn't you?" The horse's dark eyes met his. She stepped closer, nudging the shovel with her muzzle. He almost laughed. It wasn't possible. It didn't make sense. But deep down, he believed it anyway. By the time dawn crept over the horizon, he had marked half a dozen spots across the field, places where the ground sounded hollow when he struck it. Every one aligned with the red circles on the old map from the chest. Each one another scar the earth had hidden. He returned to the house exhausted, covered in dirt and questions. The papers on the table seemed to glare at him now, their secrets too heavy to ignore. He traced his family's name again and again, his jaw tight. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere near the ridge, headlights flickered, distant, slow, deliberate. A car that didn't belong. Raven let out a low, uneasy cry. Tom turned off the lamp, standing in darkness, watching through the window. The vehicle lingered for a moment, then disappeared into the night. The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It felt alive, full of eyes. Tom rested his hand on the rifle by the door. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about survival. He was thinking about defense. And as Raven shifted in the dark, her breath rising like smoke, Tom whispered into the cold air, "They came here once for this land." His voice broke into a whisper. "They're not taking it again." The next morning, the air felt heavier, like the valley was holding its breath. Tom hadn't slept. The lamp burned all night, its flame low and nervous. The letters, maps, and fragments lay spread across the kitchen table, as if they were watching him. Every time the wind hit the window, he looked up, half expecting to see someone standing there. Just after sunrise, a sound broke the stillness. 3 knocks. Sharp. Precise. Tom froze. No one came here anymore. Not in years. He wiped his hands on his jeans, moved to the door, and opened it just a crack. 3 men stood on the porch. Coats dark as oil. Shoes too clean for the dirt road. Their smiles practiced. Their eyes, not. "Mr. Hayden," said the one in front. His voice was calm, clipped, like he was reading from a script. "We've been hoping to speak with you. About your property." Tom stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Raven stirred in the paddock, ears pinned back, tail flicking. The air around her vibrated. She felt it too. The man continued, tone polite but heavy with intent. "We represent an organization with interest in this land. It's fallen into neglect. We can help you. A clean sale. A generous price. You'd be free of this burden." Tom stared at him, silent. The words free and burden twisted like knives. He thought of the chest, the papers, the letters, the history buried under every inch of this soil. "It's not for sale," he said. His voice was steady, but his pulse hammered in his neck. The man smiled again, smaller this time, colder. "You should think it over. Offers like this don't come twice." I said no. A pause. The man studied him for a long moment, then tipped his head. "As you wish." They turned, walking back to the sleek black car idling by the gate. The engine roared once, a warning disguised as routine, and they were gone, leaving only dust and tire marks curling down the road. Tom stayed on the porch, hands clenched at his sides. Raven stomped the ground, snorting, her breath sharp and white. He walked over and placed his palm on her neck. Her skin was warm beneath his fingers, alive, solid. "They came back," he whispered. "Just like he said." That night, the wind howled down the ridge, carrying with it the scent of rain and rust. Tom sat at the table, rifle beside him, papers spread like a confession. His reflection in the window looked like someone else, older, harder, hollowed by truth. Then came another sound, lighter this time. Footsteps. A knock, softer, familiar. "Tom." "It's me." He opened the door. Clara stood there, grey coat, scarf wrapped tight, her face pale in the lamplight. She had lived up the valley all her life, though he hadn't seen her in months. Her eyes darted past him toward the papers. "They came, didn't they?" she said. Tom nodded slowly. "3 of them." Clara exhaled shakily. "Then it's starting again." She stepped inside, her hands trembling as she touched one of the yellowed letters. "I told Henry this would happen," she murmured. "Decades ago, I saw those men. Trucks with no markings. Barrels. Crates. They said it was fertilizer, but we knew. Henry knew." Tom frowned. What did he know? That the land was being used. Tested. Something to do with compounds, chemicals they said were harmless. They weren't. Her voice broke. "The orchard turned black that year. The cattle died. Henry wanted to expose them, but they silenced him." Tom's chest tightened. "And now they are back for me." Clara looked toward the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. "Not for you," she said softly. "For the silence." Raven neighed suddenly, loud and sharp, her shadow shifting outside like a warning. The sound cut through the wind and the thunder rolling beyond the ridge. Tom turned back to Clara, his voice barely a whisper. "What do I do?" She met his eyes. "Finish what Henry couldn't. Don't let them bury it again." The thunder cracked. Rain began to fall, first soft, then furious. Tom moved to the window, staring out into the storm. Through the sheets of rain, the orchard looked alive again, its dark branches writhing, whispering, waiting. He looked at the chest on the table, at the rifle by the wall, at the horse outside, standing tall in the rain, watching the horizon. And for the first time in his life, Tom Hayden wasn't just a farmer anymore. He was a witness, a keeper of truth. The silence of the valley was breaking. The storm rolled in before dawn. Thunder shook the windows. Rain hammered the tin roof like fists demanding to be heard. Tom sat at the table, half asleep, rifle across his knees, the lamp still burning low. He hadn't rested, not in days. The papers lay open in front of him, their edges curling from the damp air. Every word, every signature burned into his mind. Henry Hayden, the ancestor he once admired, had known everything. He had seen what the men in dark coats were doing, and he had tried to stop them. But they buried him in silence, just like they buried their crimes under the soil. Now the silence was lifting, and the storm was its voice. When morning came, the rain hadn't stopped. Raven stood by the fence, soaked but unmoving, her head turned toward the orchard. She looked restless, alert, as if waiting for something. Tom stepped outside, coat pulled tight, the cold biting through the fabric. The world was washed in grey. The orchard bent and shivered under the weight of the wind. And then, faint but clear, he saw headlights crawling down the ridge road again. 2 black cars. The same ones. Coming closer. Tom's breath slowed. He looked toward the house, where Clara's words echoed in his mind. Finish what Henry couldn't. He reached for the old rotary phone on the wall. His fingers hesitated over the dial. Then he spun it, each click louder than the thunder. The line crackled. A woman's voice answered, cautious, distant. "Megan." He exhaled. "It's Tom." A pause. Then, "Tom? After all these years?" "There's no time," he interrupted. "I found something. Henry's papers. Maps. Evidence. They're coming for it." Her voice sharpened instantly. "Don't move anything. Don't destroy it. I'm on my way." 2 days later, a small silver car pulled up by the fence. The valley had started to dry, but the air still smelled of rain and rust. When Megan stepped out, Tom barely recognized her. Older, sharper, her eyes bright with the same stubborn fire their family was known for. She stopped when she saw Raven. The horse watched her calmly, as if judging her worth. Megan smiled faintly. "Still here, huh?" Raven snorted, as if answering, and Megan laughed, the first laughter that had touched the farm in years. Inside the house, she spread the documents across the table, reading fast, connecting dots faster. Her pen flew over a notebook, her phone buzzing with calls to names Tom didn't know. "These aren't just old papers," she said finally, voice low with awe. "They're records. Experiments. Patents. This wasn't farming, it was testing. They used this valley like a laboratory. Henry tried to expose them, and they erased him." Tom leaned against the wall, jaw tight. "And now they want to erase me." Megan nodded. "Not if we go first." By the next morning, the first article was live. A small outlet, a local name, but it spread fast. The headline read, "Buried Truth, the Hayden Valley Experiments." When the cars came again that evening, Tom and Megan were waiting. Raven stood near the orchard, her manner whipping in the wind, eyes glowing with defiance. The cars stopped at the gate, engines rumbling. But they didn't approach. They just sat there, watching, until the first flash of camera lights appeared behind them. Reporters. Drones. The world was watching now. And the black cars quietly turned around and disappeared into the distance. Tom looked at Megan. She smiled. "Told you. Once the truth breathes, no one can bury it again." That night, the storm returned, violent, cleansing. Lightning split the sky above the orchard, striking the oldest tree. It crashed into the mud, roots tearing up something metallic beneath. Tom and Megan rushed outside, rain soaking through their clothes. Together they dug until their hands were raw. And there it was, a sealed iron crate. Inside, vials, soil samples, preserved fruit, papers stamped with corporate seals. Proof. Undeniable. Megan lifted one vial, holding it up to the lightning-lit sky. "This is it," she whispered. "They can't deny this anymore." Months passed. Lawsuits. Investigations. Headlines. The name Hayden no longer whispered in shame, but in truth. And when spring returned, the orchard bloomed again. White petals drifted through the air like snow. The valley smelled alive, clean, new. Tom stood beneath the blossoms, Raven beside him, her coat shining in the sunlight. He reached out, resting a calloused hand on her neck. "You carried it all," he murmured. "The weight, the silence, the truth." Raven exhaled softly, her breath warm against his arm. The branches above them rustled, whispering in the wind, the orchard speaking at last. Tom lifted his gaze toward the distant hills, voice steady, quiet, full of peace. Sometimes the earth hides its miracles under dirt and pain. You just have to keep digging. The camera of the mind pulls back, over the blooming trees, the quiet farmhouse, the valley reborn. And for the first time in his life, Tom Hayden smiled. Not because the fight was over, but because the land had finally spoken, and the world had listened.